everybody. This is Brian Mahoney, the CEO of Trender Research and president of the OTT executive community. We're continuing in our podcast series with leaders in the industry. Today, we're joined by Sara DeWitt. Welcome, Sara.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Sara, I am so excited about this. So Sara is the SVP and GM for PBS Kids for PBS. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And before we started, I was just telling you what a big fan my family has been over the years as parents, how many times PBS has saved us and informed us and engaged us. And so I'm really excited about this chat today.
I always love hearing this. So it's great to be chatting with somebody who knows our content.
Yes. So let's start with introductions, a bit about yourself and your role there.
Sure. So I have been in this role for about a year and a half, but I've been at PBS for a really long time. I started here in '99, and I was the second person to join the brand new PBS Kids website team. So I've been in the digital space for most of my career here, but now my job is overseeing all aspects of our media work for kids ages 2 to 8. So that means broadcast television, streaming video, gaming platforms, podcasts, how we do marketing and outreach and product and tech. So it's and all of our work with member stations, because PBS is the public media entity, and we have member stations all over the country. So we've got stations throughout North America who are busy bringing our content to kids on the ground. So
we have so much to talk about, so many things to cover. Before we do that, maybe just a quick back on your career and, either before PBS and then also, your different roles there to the current day.
Sure. I'll go back a little bit before PBS. So I was an English major in college, but my focus was children's lit. And so I was focused on kind of kids and reading and how they learn to read, early literacy. And I did a master's degree with a focus on kids policy. And through that, I got to be engaged in an experimental class. So this was in the mid 90s. I was at Stanford working on my master's. And they did this class where they put English majors with computer science students. It was cross-listed between those two departments. And a prereq for it was I had to learn HTML. And the whole idea was that they were worried that English majors were afraid of technology and that all of the technology folks were suddenly having to write stories but didn't know anything about narrative. And that was the most exciting moment, I think, in my career, because it was called Interactive Narrative and Artificial Intelligence. And I got to sit down and start to try to create code that would make stories interactive for kids.
Wow,
made me realize
that's
I wanted
amazing.
to go a really different direction. So that's how I ended up then starting to work in the web for kids. And at that time at PBS, they were really trying to figure out, is this internet trend going to take off for kids? Is it safe for kids? What does this mean? And Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, was still alive at the time and felt very strongly about bringing Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood into the web world. He wanted this to be another interactive space that could be safe for kids. Mm-hmm. And so he really was one of the ones pushing PBS to start building out program websites. So my first job was working on the website for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And there's this great episode where he brings his TV neighbors online to look at the website and to see how they could explore safely. So
were you in front of the camera? Did he pull you out?
Oh, no.
Oh,
I have to admit, I've never met him, but he did send me a signed mouse pad, which you see I have framed right here.
That's
Yes. So from there, we went on to build websites for a lot of our programs on PBS. At the time, that was like Barney and Reading Rainbow, Arthur, and Zoom. I worked with the Kratt brothers on their Zaboomafoo website. This is before Wild Kratts, which is a huge hit today. And we continue to kind of think about the technology and how it could intersect with the PBS mission. So the PBS mission is to use media to create engaging and educational experiences for kids. And I think what Fred Rogers did really well was recognize that the technology was offering a new way for kids to interact with characters and a new way to learn about the show. And so our team's job was really to think about how does each technology offer us a new opportunity for learning, for kind of getting getting the mission of PBS out to kids. So we started getting into the games business. We had a few beautiful years where a lot of animation on television was being done with Flash, and Flash was the main thing we were using to build games. So all the assets could be used across the board. So we built up a huge library of games. Of course, that came to an end, but we moved on into HTML5 games. And then 2008 was when we decided to launch our first streaming video player with full-length episodes for free on PBS. In 2000, that was just a few shows kind of as an experiment, seemed to be doing well. So in 2009, we expanded it to our preschool series. And that is a really huge moment, I think, for us to realize the power of this media. We predicted, based on our little experiment, that we'd have 5 million streams a month. And in that first month, we had 67 million streams.
Wow.
This was
Incredible.
definitely a space that kids were interested in and that families were clamoring for.
So the interesting thing, just a couple of takeaways. One is you were doing a lot of this innovation way earlier than I thought, that was even possible. I mean, doing the gaming, and then before that, the interactivity. What was driving that? Like, what was there research you were looking at? Was it just kind of intuition? Talking to viewers? Like, how did you come up with that?
It's a great question, and it's kind of all of the above. I think we're always trying to pay attention to what kids are doing. Kids are often kind of the bellwether for where technology trends are going. They embrace things really rapidly and really kind of start finding new ways to do things. So part of it was watching kids, talking a lot to teachers and parents. But also a lot of it is done in partnership with research partners about the educational aspects. So, part of there are good sides and bad sides to working in a nonprofit, but a good side is that there's a lot of encouragement for experimentation without necessarily having to look at like, what is the revenue potential for something. So if you think about like when Flash video was happening on the web, there were moments where people were kind of overlaying advertising over video, and that was a very new technology. This idea that you could be watching something and have like a lower third pop up on your computer screen that would have an ad in it that was targeted to the person. We had the opportunity then to work with one of those technology partners to say, okay, what if we do that for learning moments? What if we were putting up a quiz question or an activity, and to play with that technology and then work with a research partner at a university to say, do kids learn from that? So we're always kind of talking to research partners to see, does this help move the needle? We learned really early on that games definitely did. They helped reinforce some of the core skills that kids were learning from our shows. And so that's kind of helped us find additional philanthropic support, foundation funding, so that we can do a lot more of that and really kind of be focused on the learning.
It's interesting because I talked to a lot of folks in the industry, and there's always that profit motive. And you don't really want to be too early on something unless it's going to, reap the benefits or whatever. But because you're a charter, being nonprofit, you can invest in doing the right thing, not necessarily the commercial thing, earlier. So that makes a lot of sense to me, I think.
Yeah.
So you brought it up now a couple of times. Let's talk about games.
Sure.
It's big right now in the industry. Netflix is launching a bunch of games. The technology's been around for a while. Not everybody thought that would be something that would be part of the umbrella of, TV and video. What are your initiatives there at gaming, and where do you see that, going in the future?
Well, certainly if you think about kids and you think about like what they expect from different screens, gaming is something they look for immediately. So in those early days when we were just working on the computer screen, pre-tablets, everything, we saw that kids were coming there, they wanted to see the characters, but they wanted to play games with the characters because they thought of computers as being kind of a gaming space. And if you look at the trends even today, like I was looking at one of the Kids Insights reports, gaming is the top activity that kids do on every platform except television. So on the TV screen, they're watching more video, and then games is second. But on computers, on tablets, on mobile devices, that's the first thing a kid is thinking about and the first thing they want to do. So it makes sense to us to think about, okay, we know they love these shows and that they love getting engaged with these characters. Like you mentioned to me that your kids were watching Curious George and Arthur. And so kids love those worlds. And then when they come to like a mobile device or a tablet, they then want to play with those characters. Or in the case of Odd Squad, where it's live action kids who are agents fighting problems with math, solving odd problems with math, and they want to be an agent. So really thinking about how do you put kids into that space and let them experience it. So for us, it's part of that kind of world building. Mm-hmm. It's a way of expanding the narrative content into kind of everything surrounding a kid. And I think for everyone who grew up with computer games, like I played computer games as a kid, everybody who grew up with that, there's kind of, we still like, we want to play things. We want to do things. Right. It makes sense to me that the gaming industry is kind of moving now that we've gotten into more casual gaming on mobile and computer gaming, that this would start to be a bigger thing for adults as well.
Mm-hmm. And so, back to sort of the charter for PBS being different, you think of, maybe you can define your charter, but sure. In my mind as a parent, it was about learning, and it was about, learning, growing up. It was learning lessons that you might learn in school, or sort of enhancing those moral lessons even. How did you see gaming sort of accomplishing that mission?
Mm-hmm. Because we can take those exact same educational goals and play them out in a gaming environment. So in the case of math with Odd Squad, they're introducing topics like a number line and what's a positive number and what's a negative number. But then when you go to the games, and we have games, I should have mentioned, we have games on pbskids.org. And then also we have a PBS Kids games app, which is on mobile devices. And those, the games app is our fastest growing app. And it's free to download. So and we can talk more about that. But when you watch Odd Squad and then you go play Odd Squad games on the app, you get to put those ideas into practice. And so you can see a number line and you can start to play with, how do I get to a negative number versus a positive number? But you're doing it in a way that matches the show. You're doing it in a way that's trying to like thwart the villain and be an agent the way you've seen people on screen. We often hear from universities that they do research on some of our content, and sometimes we commission studies. One of our most popular shows right now is called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and it's a preschool show that's a spinoff of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's the next generation. Mm-hmm. And all of those games and those shows are focused on kids' emotional well-being and social skills. Mm-hmm. And Texas Tech University did a study about kids and empathy around the show, and discovered that kids who watched the show and had conversations with their parents about what they watched measured as having greater empathy than kids who didn't. So it's really fascinating to see how media can have an impact on kids' skills.
Where do we go wrong as a society? Like PBS is such an amazing institution over the years, and just talking to you, it sort of reinforces a lot of things I've always thought. We can learn from gaming, we can learn from interactivity, we can learn from immersion, educational things, social values, all those good things. How do we go from there to where we are now, where my teenage kids are on the Xbox and it's first-person shooters, and I don't think they're, learning a lot of, virtuous things from that gaming experience. Now, it's an escape, but like, is there something we can do to kind of extend what you're doing with PBS Kids into teenagers, maybe even adulthood? I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
We talk about this all the time, that, we focus on kids 2 to 8. And when kids reach 8 years old, that's kind of like a weird media space. There's not a lot being created for them. Because it's really, it's focused on what's the most commercially viable thing. And that is often the first person shooters, the heavy action, things like that. I really think there is a market for it. It's about trying to, for us, it's about fundraising and finding the money to be able to move into that space. But I do think there are a lot of kids who are looking for content like that, who are really interested in topics like science, like, storytelling, who are ready to move into something that is age appropriate for them, but also is more focused on how they learn about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it must be so jarring for 8-year-olds to go from this wonderful sort of comfortable learning environment to be like, hey, here's a first person shooter, here's your pass. Now you're going to be spending hours on this. And I don't know, maybe it's, I'm just a little too sentimental, but, I think that there's some lessons to be learned there in terms of how we impart wisdom to the younger kids and they become the next generation. So anyhow, so let's talk a little bit more about the overall experience. You mentioned your streaming app. You mentioned your website. What is your sort of distribution strategy for getting your content out there, devices, any wisdom you can give for our listeners and viewers about here are some untapped opportunities to really kind of broaden your reach?
Yeah, I think kids really, if you think about the times that your kids grew up and kids today, they're growing up in a space where like everything is really on demand. And that there is a device there all the time. And what this means is that kids kind of expect content wherever it's available and are looking for it. So every time something new happens, we hear from people saying, hey, why isn't Daniel Tiger here? And so it's really, we're constantly thinking about where kids are and what platforms families are, what they prefer. So that means that for a subset of our audience, it still is broadcast. There's definitely an audience. I'd say it's like 4 million kids a month who access PBS Kids on broadcast. And for a lot of those families, that is the one thing they have.
It's not going away. Yep.
Yeah, it's not going away. And then we have our digital platforms. We have our owned platforms, our OTT PBS Kids app, as well as our mobile app. We have pbskids.org, which, a lot of website stuff had been declining until the pandemic. And then if you think about that moment where all of these elementary school kids across the country were issued laptops. And so, I had an 8-year-old at the time. He had never used a laptop in his life. And we had to pick one up from school. And suddenly he was on the web and typing in URLs, something he had never done on a tablet, because that was his only exposure. Website traffic just went through the roof. And that is still right now our number one traffic platform for both streaming and games. Well, it's not number one for streaming, but that's our number one platform overall. And kids are doing games and streaming on it. And then also we watch the landscape and what's happening. So we have a lot of short form content. So in addition to our episodic content, we have several series that are original short form. And so those are on our streaming platforms, but also on our PBS Kids YouTube channel, because that's a definitely big distribution spot for kids, as well as our full length episodes there as well. And then podcasts are very big in the kids industry. And they were already growing before the pandemic. They definitely took off a lot more as parents were looking for more content for kids. And frankly, some content that wasn't screens for kids during that time that would also kind of keep them occupied and be educational. And that has been a really interesting space for us. So Arthur has now launched a podcast.
Nice.
And it's, we offer it on podcast platforms, but
is it
his own
voice,
podcast. Yeah.
Okay.
He's
So
interviewing his friends and recapping some of his favorite stories from different episodes. It's a lot of fun. I encourage you to listen. We also have podcasts for Molly of Denali, which is our show set in Alaska. It was our show that it was the first Native Alaskan lead in an American kids show.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
And it's a great podcast. It's really fun. It gets into a lot of Alaska landscape and culture. She travels some during the podcast, but also that show is focused on the part of literacy that we call informational text, which is you use text around you, how you read brochures and signs, and how you use maps to find out where you're going. And so a podcast is perfect for that, to like kind of think through like, how am I navigating the world? What am I looking for? How do I get information? So podcasts have been a really fun experiment for us. And I think a lot of fun for our producers too, because it's another way for them to build their worlds out, to tell different kinds of stories than they would normally tell just in an episode with animation. And it challenges them to think about, how am I going to use sound? How am I going to use music to really convey what I want to convey here? But
is the format similar to Arthur for all of them, where it's sort of like a character interviewing or engaging, like having a conversation like this, or is it?
They're all different.
Okay.
So Molly of Denali is definitely serial storytelling. Okay. So there's an event happening, and every episode you're picking up where the story left off the last time. Arthur is interviewing his friends, and then getting deeper into some of the favorite stories that they had. Our Odd Squad cast is, you're listening to the Odd Squad news network as if you were an agent, and then you realize that there's a problem happening. So as the viewer at home, or the listener at home, you're trying to figure out what's happening. It's a great way to experiment with formats. But we stream these on our own digital platforms, on our video players, as well as on YouTube. And I think this is another interesting piece for kids, because a lot of kids in our audience don't have their own devices. Audio storytelling is something all kids have loved for a very long time, but they don't necessarily know the word podcast, and they don't necessarily have a device that allows them to get podcasts, but they have access to streaming video platforms. And so we see that a lot of kids are streaming it on our video player or on YouTube. So it's kind of, you think about how kids access content. This makes sense. We're just putting it everywhere they might find it.
Okay. And connected TVs too. That's a big trend right now.
Oh, absolutely. Connected TVs are a fast growing space for us. And so we're actively getting our app on more and more platforms there.
Okay. So Sara, we're talking about distribution, your different strategy, embracing the world of digital and streaming. Maybe kind of let's go up a little bit and talk about the industry at large and what you see as some of the larger trends right now.
Well, a few years ago, you may have remembered all the headlines. A lot of the commercial streamers were really pouring a lot of money into the kids service. And you were seeing huge checks going out to creators to bring in a lot of new kids shows, really thinking about the ways that kids drive subscribers for those services, because they're, driving a lot of viewing among families. And I think this was like a really kind of awesome moment for the kids industry. You saw a lot of new creators getting opportunities that they'd never had before. A lot of really interesting content came out, just a ton of content in general. Some of it was really great, was coming out. And we're seeing a retraction of that right now. Just in the last 9 months, you've watched, Netflix do a lot of consolidation of their animation studios. Warner Brothers Discovery kind of pulled back on a lot of their kids' titles. YouTube originals for kids and families, that whole division was cut. I think it's, these things are cyclical. And I think right now, as the industry is feeling more pressure, kids is kind of the first thing that they're pulling back on now that they have some content there. I think it's going to be an interesting space for the next little while. There's, a lot of content was created, so there's still a lot there, but what's going to happen over these next few years? I think for us at PBS, it means, more than ever that we have to stay committed to our mission of making sure we're creating new content that really, is meeting educational goals for these kids, especially these kids coming out of the pandemic with a lot of learning loss, but also really thinking about how we're really representing kids in the United States today, making sure that kids can see themselves reflected on screen. So it means for us that we're focusing even more on like, how can we make sure we're getting more of those new and exciting creators a platform and a showcase. And so for us, that means more short form content that we can get out more quickly. It means more kind of podcast opportunities. We're doing some specials so that we can try to be working with some of these folks, and then really thinking about our pipeline. How do we continue to make sure we've got lots of new series coming out as we see this kind of retraction across the industry?
Yeah, it really is unfortunate. I mean, there was such a sort of land grab in terms of content creation, and there's a lot of creativity. And, unfortunately, we've got a little bit of retraction going on, maybe more than a little bit. And the industry tends to fly to safety, and the big brands, the big universes that they know are going to be sure bets. So we don't want to lose that, right? I think it's really important. But it sounds like you're adjusting, right? You're going to small form. You're going to digital, you're expanding your audiences that way, and hopefully that bet pays off over time.
Yes, I think so. I mean, we are continuing to see really strong digital numbers and great growth on some platforms. So I think for us, this feels really clear to us that we've got to stay the course and really see where we can be being a little more nimble around some of these newer formats, which are also the things that kids are looking for. Yeah.
So we talked about distribution. Thank you for that. Let's talk about the engagement with the content, content discovery. So once you get, kids in there, and there's so many shows, and my wife's going to be wondering why I'm watching all these shows this afternoon. Some of these, all these
research.
Yeah, it's research, honey. That's why I'm watching this. And our third podcast, I'm definitely going to check that out. So what do you do to kind of direct children to the content they want? I mean, it must be interesting getting into the child's mind. It's a different process of understanding their journey for content discovery, right?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. So, a lot of, if you think about this age group, 2 to 8, they're new kids coming in all the time. Mm-hmm. And there's a constant process of re-engagement. So I think this is the same for most ages, but we've got a shorter window and we've got them. And so a lot of what we're focused on is re-engagement. If you're watching Daniel Tiger and you could be aging out, then we want to make sure that we're showing you what's next. So there's a lot of, making sure that in our own platforms, we're showcasing what else is coming. But for this age group of kids, we're really most focused on the parents and educators. They are the ones who are making a lot of that, the first decisions about which apps they're downloading for their kids and which shows they're looking at first. And so, social media is absolutely the way to reach parents in this age cohort. This is the way that they are finding information. And a lot of parents are also asking teachers or librarians for recommendations. Teachers and librarians have been big fans of PBS for a long time, but there's a lot of engagement we do through our learning media platform for those professionals that it aligns our content to state and national standards so that teachers can find something that works in their classroom. A lot of work making sure that they're aware of new shows that are coming out and what the focus is on, so that we know that those human recommendation engines are ready to be sharing. So, but then connected TV is probably where we're doing our most of our paid media marketing right now, because that is the lot of growth. And, as families get new TVs, we will need to be, top of mind early.
You need to be on them. That's for sure. You got to have your child. So let's stick with social just a little bit, because social media is an opportunity for viewer acquisition and content discovery. It's also a platform for engagement. Talk about that a little bit. How do you get parents, not only knowing what shows they want to watch, talking about them, pulling them in? Is that part of how they learn? You mentioned teachers as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, your strategy.
Yes. And it's constantly evolving. Again, since the pandemic, the choices for parents of what social media platforms they're even using has changed in just the last few years. So right now it is really focused very much on video and, vertical video, like Instagram type things for parents, and thinking about ways that we can connect those shows to what parents are thinking about and wondering about right now. And so, or connecting those shows to their kids. So I think about one of the videos we launched really recently is for our show, Rosie's Rules, just a social studies show. It's based in San Antonio, Texas. And it's a funny show. So in research, you should watch Rosie's Rules. It's very funny.
I'm gonna have to do some research, primary research, right?
And so she's trying to figure out how the world works. And if you think about kids in that age group, they start to imagine how does food get into the fridge? How does food get to the grocery store? They don't know all the systems that are in place that they're just starting to understand how the world works. And so they have these wild theories about how things work. And so it's really playing off of that. Let's play on a wild theory that a kid has. And, in one case, Rosie's learning about how the mail works and is I know, I'm going to mail my cat to my grandmother in Mexico because my abuela has not felt how soft she is. And if the mail can do that, I just have to put a stamp on her, And so this is the kind of thing a kid in that age group would do.
Right.
And so it kind of plays through that story. But in every episode, at some point, Rosie realizes that whatever she's doing is not working. And she has to just flop and take a minute and breathe and think through her problem. So we're also trying to model this for kids. So, one of these vertical videos in social is Rosie's flop, which is always a very funny moment in the episode. And then real kids flopping and real kids trying to get through their problem and move on and stitching that together. It's very funny. It makes parents kind of stop and laugh because they can see their kids doing something like that. It's also a moment where a parent might show it to their kid and then think, oh, let's go watch Rosie's Rules. So it's trying to think about how do you connect immediately with what's funny, what's going to make your kid recognize something that's like them, and then make you then want to go look for it.
Yeah, it's a sweet moment. It reminds me a lot of Curious George because he's always getting into trouble. Got a great idea, and then I guess you call it the flop, and then he kind of gets frustrated and he learns from it. And the man with the yellow hat comes and reassures him, and everything ends well, of course, right?
So a little quiz: do you know what the curriculum is for Curious George?
No.
It's engineering.
Oh,
think about it. He's
always building stuff. That's right.
Constantly taking things apart and then trying to build it and put it back together. Yeah. And that one also, the games had like proven statistically significant impact on kids' math knowledge when they played Curious George games, because it was about building and kind of spatial structures. So
wow, that's interesting, because I read all the books when I was a kid, and I took one of those tests, and it told me I was supposed to be a mechanical engineer. I'm clearly a flunky because I was a philosophy major in school, and then went to business school. So something didn't translate there. But that's so interesting. So does every show kind of have a theme or a curriculum that it's focused on?
Every single show of ours has a curriculum. So Word Girl behind me is vocabulary. Dinosaur Train was focused on, it's different types of dinosaurs, but it was also really looking at the features of different species. So in every episode, Buddy will look at another dinosaur and say, oh, you have claws, and how do they compare to my claws? And yours are sharper than mine. And what does that mean that you can do that I can't do? So it's really about like the noticing those attributes of animals and how that affects what they're able to do. Natural sciences. Yeah.
And what's Super Y? Spelling?
Yeah, Super Y is early literacy. So it's letter recognition, phonemic awareness, and spelling.
So it helps to, and I know you have, a lot of expertise in this, to engage teachers. I mean, the educational community, they're big stakeholders in your content, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And, I think in the early days of the pandemic, we saw so many teachers and librarians recommending PBS Kids content to families because it could build on some of those skills that while schools were shut down, the kids weren't getting in the classroom. That's everything we do is supplemental. It's supposed to be supportive of what kids are learning. But I think in that moment, we realized like what a value it could be, all these free resources for parents.
It is an amazing resource. My family's certainly benefited. Millions of families have. It occurs to me, Sara, that not all kids are at the same capability level. Maybe we can talk about accessibility a little bit, and your strategy in supporting that initiative.
Yes, I would be happy to. This is something really important to us. So accessibility, we really look at it in two ways. There is accessibility for thinking about kids who have, visual learning or audio, different impairments that we can be trying to support. And there's also accessibility in terms of true access that kids have to different technologies. And so we kind of are thinking about both of those things. So I'll start with the access to technology first. We think a lot about kids who don't have real consistent access to Wi-Fi at home. So lots of kids have access to devices, but it may just be through cell phone data, which is not an ideal situation if you're streaming video or playing games. And so the PBS Kids Games app that I mentioned is all built on a model of really light HTML5 games that can be downloaded and then kept on the device to be used outside of Wi-Fi. So we really think of it as like a library. So we have over 250 games on this platform. Kids can, when they have Wi-Fi, download the games that they want, and when they're at home, play them, and then exchange them out the next time they're at a library.
Are they, sorry to interrupt, are they different versions for accessible versions versus the others, or is it just
No,
the
it's
game?
same for everybody.
Okay.
So same, any kid who's going on an airline flight can download a bunch of games and then take it with them to play. And then when they land, swap them out and choose which other games they'd like to play. And same with downloadable video. So we've offered that for kids as well, so they can take it with them. So that's like a really big piece of what we are thinking about. A lot of kids are on second or third hand devices. They get kind of their parents' hand-me-downs. So we also are always working on much older browsers and platforms than most commercial media entities. We can see that we've got kids who are on second and third generation devices who are regularly accessing our content. So we have to make sure it's not going to break or that it will kind of degrade gracefully on those. So our technology team spends a lot of time working on problems that I'm sure no other media entities are focused on, and trying to say, how do I make sure this kid who is, on iOS 10 or iOS 9 can still access this? And at what point then is our audience small enough that we can drop that? So that's kind of
from a commercial perspective, it's much more brutal, right? Other players in the industry be like, all right, sorry, that's too old. You're done. We're not supporting it anymore. But you don't have that, you can't do that.
Yeah, we don't have that same opportunity. And if you think too about like the computers that are in libraries or community centers, for some kids, that's the only access they get. And we've got to make sure it works really well on those. But then on the other side of accessibility, closed captioning was developed years ago by a PBS station, GBH in Boston. And that's pretty ubiquitous. But I think what we're also thinking about is how do we make sure that not just captioning, but also descriptive audio is on all of our streaming videos. So we've built that in on most of our shows, and hope to have even more out by the rest of the year, by the end of this year. So descriptive audio then is explaining what's happening on the screen for someone who is visually impaired. We also have done a lot of games where we've built in accessibility features, like being able to turn down the audio for kids who have kind of sensory overload experiences, so that they can kind of make sure that the music doesn't have to play all the time. They can turn that off so they can focus more. We've done a lot of work with color contrast to make sure that visually impaired kids, things are really popping for them on the screen. And that even though we're using a bright kids color palette, we're making sure the contrast is great enough that they can always kind of see what's there. And also doing a lot with other languages too. So Spanish captions, Spanish audio, and Spanish descriptive audio whenever we can. So this is just kind of a regular piece of our work.
It's important to me. I have a nephew who has Down syndrome, another nephew with autism, and and engaging in digital content, PBS and beyond that is really important. It's sort of a happy, safe place for them. And it's just, there's lessons to be learned, I think, for the industry at large, and how to make things more accessible.
Yeah. And there's so much that you can do that actually isn't all that complicated. Like changing all the colors wasn't all that complicated, but it took a little work, and it took working with some experts, and it made a huge difference for a big part of the audience. And the piece about being able to mute the music, or being able to
minor thing, right? Easy to do. Yeah.
But can be kind of make or break for some kids as they're playing, their ability to really engage with the content. Yeah.
Well, Sarah, we're almost out of time, and we could talk for hours about this. I actually want to talk about every show that you have and share memories.
All the things.
All the things. And I will have to do some primary research. I might be looking at Curious George later on this afternoon. Yeah. Always loved that show. It's such a sweet story.
It's so
but one of the things we'd like to do in these podcasts is sort of personalize the leaders in the industry, people like yourself, something about you, a hobby, an interest that our audience might not know, they might find interesting.
Well, it's funny, I'm living my work life right now, because I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, and and also my husband was career military until very recently. So we spent a lot of time moving around the country, and I would be teleworking back to PBS. But I think the thing that, if I go back to my very beginning, I started in this business because I love children's literature, and it is so fun to do book clubs with my kids. So this is what we're doing right now, is we're working.
Because you get to read the book, right?
Yes, because I get to read it with them. So we've been doing Newbery Award winning books, and then doing little book clubs at home with those. So I feel like that's my main hobby right now, is kind of exploring this with my kids. The other thing we love to do is, when a big book adaptation hits, like Mysterious Benedict Society on Disney, reading those books and then watching it together, and then talking about, like, every time they made a character change and why did that happen? So it sounds a lot like my daily life, but I feel like that's kind of my main thing right now is
but you're also a scholar too. Do you ever find yourself, when you're like engaging in children's content, like reading a book? I was, we always read to our kids when they were little, read Curious George books, or our favorite book was Goodnight Moon, and then the other one was Bunny Bungalow. Remember Bunny? Do you ever get Bunny Bungalow?
I have seen Bunny Bungalow. Yeah, that's cute.
I would overanalyze it, and I'd be like, wait a minute, that carrot, on top of the house, that's gonna rot. That's like, I would ruin it for the kids because I'm just too much. I'm too heady, I guess. Do you ever find yourself doing that?
Oh, the number of times I've said, I feel like my kids can now say, oh, mommy thinks they should have edited this part differently. Like, this part was too long, or something like that. Yeah. That's what makes working through. So the Newbery Award winners are the chapter books that win, once a year. They do an award on a single book. Reading those is really a fun thing to do, because those are often really fantastic and kind of speak to a moment of time. So when you go back and read some of the old ones, you think, that wouldn't really fly today, and why is that? So that's been a really fun discussion as well. But yeah, lots of mommy commentary. Try to
That's great. And it's nice, for the work that you do, you have a built-in focus group with it.
Yes. Yeah,
with the kids.
They did a lot of work for a lot of game testing during the pandemic, I will tell you that.
Yeah. My daughter wants to be a teacher someday. So she's very much into, and she's a babysitter, and she loves that role. She's very organized, and I could see her someday engaging her kids or her class in PBS Kids content for sure. It'll be around forever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I hope so.
George isn't getting any older, neither is Arthur.
But there's new stuff all the time too. So it's fun. Kids are still, they love those old characters, and they still really connect, but they're also very savvy. They see new things and get excited about kind of new animation styles too. So this is a really fun industry to be in. It's always changing, and kids are always kind of pushing us to do something new.
That's awesome. Well, kudos to you. PBS is an institution. It's great to see how you evolved and adapted to the digital world and the streaming world, continuing with your mission to do good, and profits don't always drive the right behavior. And so it's great to have sort of landmark properties like PBS Kids doing what you're doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It was great. Well, that's all the time we have. Once again, this is Brian Mahoney from Trend Research and OTT Executive Community signing off. Sara, thanks again.
Thank you so much. This is really fun.
Have a great day, everybody.